can't buy. It resides between my eyes. Walked through the fire, came out better on the other side. See, life's like a beach if you find the sand. And right now, I feel like 100 grand.
You are listening to Inspired Insider with your host, Dr. Jeremy Wise.
Dr. Jeremy Weiss here, founder of InspiredInsider.com, where I talk with inspirational entrepreneurs and leaders. Today is no different. I have Chris Herbert, Mi6 Agency. You can check him out at mi6agency.com. Chris, before I formally introduce you, I always like to point out other episodes of the podcast people should check out. Some of my favorite ones when we're talking about, since this is part of the Top Agency series, I did one with Todd Taskey. Todd Taskey, he runs the Second Bite podcast, but he helps pair private equity and agency owners. He helps sell agencies. And what's interesting is he talks about the valuation space, the agency space, and he finds, sometimes those founders that sell make more on the second bite than they do on the first. They sell to private equity, then private equity sells again. They roll equity into that. So it's interesting to hear that model of selling, not retiring on a beach, but actually keep doing what you're doing and roll it into a larger entity. So I thought that was very interesting. Another of my favorites was with Adee Clevitt. Adee Clevitt is an agency, and she does done-for-you SOPs for companies, okay? And we geeked out on our favorite software, productivity tools, and systems and processes, which, as you know, kind of makes things run smoother, from onboarding staff, onboarding clients. So we really walk through those things. So people can check out more on InspiredInsider.com. This episode is brought to you by Rise25. At Rise25, we help businesses give to and connect their dream relationships and partnerships. And how do we do that? We do that by helping you run your podcast. We're an easy button for a company to launch and run a podcast. We do the strategy, the accountability, and the full execution. Chris, we're kind of like the magic elves that run in the background to make it look easy for the host and the company so they can create amazing content, amazing relationships, and most importantly, run their business. And we were talking a little bit about this before we hit record. For me, the number one thing in my life is relationships. I know that you feel the same. And I'm always looking at ways to give to my best relationships. I have found no better way over the past decade to profile the people and companies I most admire and share with the world what they're working on. So if you've thought about podcasting, you should. We'll talk about Chris's podcast. And if you have questions, go to rise25.com or email us at support@rise25.com. I am excited to introduce Chris Herbert. He's the founder of Mi6 Agency. And for over 15 years, they've helped small businesses with really practical marketing insights and solutions to face all of the challenges that they have in business. And there can be a lot of those. And he also advocates for sustainable and responsible growth, hence his Rural Entrepreneur podcast, which kind of extends that mission. And he really adopts a comprehensive approach on focusing on building sustainable businesses, which includes community engagement and active participation in the entrepreneurial ventures. And we'll talk about some of the frameworks he has around this as well. Chris, thanks for joining me.
I'm honored to be here today. Thanks for inviting me, Jeremy. Looking forward to the conversation.
Me too. Just start off and tell people about Mi6 Agency and what you do.
Sure. So we've started 15 years ago, and our primary focus is to help entrepreneurs start, build, grow, and scale their businesses. And in some instances, we've helped them exit. So we want to integrate marketing into everything that they think and do in order to achieve the success they want to achieve, both as an entrepreneur and for their venture. The only focus of a business really is to get and keep customers, and helping them navigate through the markets they're targeting, helping them think about their business from a business model perspective where they can create, deliver, and capture value is at the core of what we do. And then the programs and services we implement focus in on helping them go to market and get and keep customers.
We're going to get into the framework. I like frameworks, you like frameworks, and this is comes from over 30 years. I'm not going to age you too much here, but you could probably whoop some people in squash, but 30 years of experimentation, implementation. So we're going to go through this marketing framework that you've really honed in on over the past couple of decades. But I want to start before we get into this on some of the things you learned from these previous companies, organizations, experience. Because when you look at your track record and experience, it's pretty interesting and eclectic. You know, you were a professional squash player. You were a marketing specialist and business development and director of marketing of even like laser eye care centers. Even you were marketing at, Squash, Ontario, looking at American commuter experience. I mean, just so many interesting experiences. So I'm wondering what you took from some of these other companies working there into MI6. What sticks out as learnings?
Well, the most interesting thing of my past, gosh, 25 years. I'm 61 and enjoying life with no plans to retire. Um, the most sort of gratifying thing that's helped me get to where I am today and the way I think about helping other entrepreneurs start and grow their businesses and become successful is that I've worked with entrepreneurs who have started and grown businesses and learned directly from them. Um, so I have had experiences, working with companies that were uh, rocket-like, let's say, and again, we're always working with entrepreneurs and trying to figure out ways to grow the company with little money to no money. And that's always sort of stuck in my mind is, what can I learn from these entrepreneurs? And are there common things that I've learned from them? And some of the things have always been, really not getting too far away from understanding and knowing, what your customer needs and wants and figuring out ways to stay engaged with them. So when I was director of marketing at a software and system integration company before I went out on my own, I was there
Was
for
that Eunice or
Eunice Lumen. Yeah.
yeah?
Yeah, they were acquired by SoftChoice, but during that time that I was there, it went from 14 million to around 70 million, but by the time it was sold, I was involved in the day-to-day activities as a squash, or sorry, as a squash, as a marketing director and inside sales manager, learning about the selling and marketing of complex solutions, which takes time to sell, takes a lot of time to educate customers in terms of the value that the solutions offer.
It was like a B2B software with like a long sales cycle.
Very long sales
How
cycle.
long was the sales cycle?
Uh, Minimum 6 months, it could be as long as 18 months, depending on whether they were kicking tires, starting to, plan for budgets and things like that. But at the end of it all was, it's all about human interaction. And I remember um, I remember the owner telling me that, first of all, people have to like you first. So if you're a sales rep or if you're a marketing person or customer support rep, you got to figure out a way that somebody's going to like you or at least feel comfortable about interacting with you. And then they've got to sort of like the solution or the solution idea, and then they'll like the company. And that sort of stuck with me, is how do you create a situation where people want to work with you? And that's interesting. It's an interesting way to go to market. It's figuring out ways that people will want to work with you. And it's not just about you knowing how to solve a problem. It's whether they actually they care that you can solve their problem,
Yeah.
and whether they want to work with you. So The other thing that I stuck with me, if I might elaborate on, is, everybody needs to understand how to sell. Not just the sales reps, but the marketing people need to learn how to sell. Founders need to understand how to sell. And even if it's not their strength, just having an understanding of how selling works is so, so important. And that should feed into how marketing can support sales and vice versa. Very important thing, whether it's B2C or B2B, it's the same thing, is this how do those two things work together? Very important.
Expand on that a little bit,
Sure.
Chris. What have you learned on how to sell? And I want to just kind of echo that because, like we say, I love that people have to like you. They also have to like the solution. This kind of came in play with I was talking to a friend who went to a doctor and they were an amazing doctor, but the person was not that nice. And they're
Mm.
like, I don't want to be their patient, right? So it comes into play in a lot of different arenas, even in a lot of professions. But what have you learned on on how to sell?
Well, what I've learned for the most part, and this is from my own personal successes and lessons learned, as well as really, really, really good sales professionals, especially in the technology industry, is patience, um, really understanding the customer, um, to the extent that you can, and trying to think about ways that you can deliver value to them throughout the sales cycle. Even if they're not in the buying cycle, you're always thinking about ways that you can deliver value to them. And the other thing is, just realizing that they don't really care that you've got a quota. They don't care that you need to sell something. Um, they care more about whether you really understand the problems that they're facing and if you can uncover problems that they didn't think they'd be facing. And from there, you work your tail off to really figure out ways that you can solve those problems with them at a profit for your company, obviously. Um, the other thing that I've noticed recently, just responsiveness is so, so important, even more so today, but being responsive, being empathetic, um, but asking for the order. I've found in some cases that people are reluctant to ask for the order, and you need to ask for the order. And I remember one CEO of a company, when I was working for him, heading up marketing, I said, "What's the one piece of advice you would give an entrepreneur if they were starting out?" And he said, "Always be closing." Um, the challenge is if you're always trying to close, you have to be careful, that somebody doesn't always feel that you have your hand out. You're always asking for something. Um, what else can I tell you about that?
I like the delivering value throughout the sales cycle. What were some of the things you did at Eunice? Because obviously we're talking a longer sales cycle. You have 18 months,
Mhm.
maybe even longer. What were some of the things you did throughout that year and a half or more to deliver value in the process?
Yeah, so the challenge we had at Eunice Lumen was we had a CTO who was the co-founder, who was a rocket scientist. Like he was everything that a client would want in terms of an advisor. So he was in high demand. But the problem with that is, he would be asked to go out on four-legged sales calls all the time. And he was getting tired. So I turned it around and said, okay, so the buying cycle is what really matters. There's a sales cycle, right, which is our sales cycle, but what's the buying cycle like? And understanding, when people are searching for a solution, they're basically information gathering, right? And they're not really prepared to, open up too much. They're kind of careful, let's say, in terms of how much information they want to give. So Morrow, who is the gentleman in question here, what we did is we spun it around and said, okay, so we know that you're in demand and we know the sales reps are all clamoring for you. So instead of doing one-to-one, we're actually going to have physical events, like typical events, seminars, get-togethers with a social component to it. And you're going to get up and talk about emerging trends in technology. And what happened in the very beginning was the sales reps kind of pushed back and said, well, it's your job as a head of marketing to fill the seats. And I said, no, it's not. In fact, you know how difficult it is to get more on a sales call. You have 5 seats out of 40 that you can fill. 2 of them can be existing customers, and 3 of them can be prospects. You have 5 seats. So we told all the sales reps that you have 5 seats. So they started fighting because they wanted to make sure that they had their customers and their prospects coming to those events. And they knew that it was going to be easier for them to get in front of Morrow that way. So that was one thing that was really, really important. The other thing happened out of that was we deliberately made it so that customers were coming to the events as well as prospects and introduced them to each other so that the prospect could talk to the customer and said, what's it like working with these folks? Are they legit?
So much more powerful, right?
Yeah. So that's just one example. And we thought about the buying cycle, right? We were thinking about, where are they in the buying cycle? And in some cases, they're not yet ready to buy, but they're probably would get into the buying cycle if they learned something about where technology was heading, and they could talk to other customers who were already deploying the technologies. So very important to bring those people together, and as a group. So that was probably one of the most successful things that we did, where we were aligning the sales and the buying cycle as much as we could and integrating marketing into the sales process, and making it so that the reps actually were clamoring for seats, as opposed to waiting for us to send an email blast out and just fill the room with, cold bodies sort of thing. That worked out really well.
You created I guess this scarcity that made people want to go out and get people, right? Because if you gave them unlimited, no big deal. But that scarcity,
yeah.
I mean, we know it's kind of I know one of my favorite books is Influence by Robert Cialdini, and he talks about that as one of the things. On that note, we'll get into. I want to get into. Eventually, you obviously decide to start your own business. We'll get into that, but I do want to circle back to the framework a little bit because this kind of relates to all the stuff that you've learned over the past couple decades, and just talk about the MI6 framework.
Yeah, can you expand the browser so you can see the framework over top of the text? It's kind of overlapping.
There you go. How's that?
Yeah, that's good.
Cool.
Yeah, so this came out of a lot of the work that I did at Unis Lumen, actually, is I was learning about the things that I thought were key components that would make for a really good, sustainable marketing program. And there are 6 components that we implement all the time or we're cognizant of. So, for example, value exchange is really simply just, I can go down into, I'll go to the value exchange piece first, which I think is really important. So value from a business model perspective is about how do you create, deliver, and capture value. And creating value means, what do you offer? And then delivery is how do you offer it? So, for example, in your case, you offer turnkey podcasts for organizations so that they can get quality podcasts done probably faster and better than if I did it myself. This is an example. So for us, it's, we want to be able to deliver marketing programs, so that it helps entrepreneurs start, grow, and potentially exit at some point in time. But the business model, any business really has to be built on three things. How do you create, deliver, capture value? So that's the one piece in terms of value exchange. The other part of value exchange is relationships, right? So, and this is something that I think is really an integral part of our framework and just the way to do business in today's day and age. It's not just transactional, a relationship. So our relationship is not yet transactional in the sense that Mi6 is outsourcing podcast development with you at this stage, but it could be in the future. Instead, the value that's being exchanged is my knowledge and my experience and things through this podcast. So that's a different form of value. It's cultural and network. It's who do I know? It's what do I know, sort of thing. So value exchange is really important from a business model perspective and relationships. I won't go into any more details about the value exchange part, but that's really important, right? So, and what the other part to the framework is, today it's around a search optimized website and content. Content is something that should be used at various stages of the buying cycle. And if you can, it should be search engine optimized so that it's geared towards search results or search intent, right? Just as an example. The next couple pieces are important too, is stakeholders and channels. So today, stakeholders are your customers, they're your partners, they're your prospects, they're members of your network, and the channels are the routes in which you communicate to, whether it's through social, through email, through other ways in which you can reach people. Very important part, and that never changes. What channels you use is really determines on who your audience is, that sort of thing. So for some people, it could be Facebook. For some people, it could be LinkedIn. It depends on who their target audience is, et cetera, et cetera. The next part is really the frameworks, methodologies, and principles. So our framework is one, but there are lots of frameworks out there that we will look at and implement. And methodologies, standard operating principles. I mean, you were telling me about somebody,
a D,
well, yeah, where there are these recipes, these best practices that you can implement. I mean, Ash Moria, I don't know if you know him from Lean, the Lean Stack, and running Lean. He has a really amazing set of frameworks for startup founders to use, including the Lean Canvas map, customer factory, and traction roadmaps. These are all frameworks that sort of help short circuit you and help you get further ahead faster, if that makes sense. And principles
this is it, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's perfect. Yeah. Yeah. So those three things, value exchange, search optimized website, and stakeholders and challenge are kind of the front end of the business. These are things typically that people would see and experience, right? They'd see how you're exchanging value. They'd go to your website. They'd consume your content. And then stakeholders are, your customers and the channels in which you communicate. The back end is, do you have a marketing system in place that helps you manage everything? So, for example, if you're wondering what type of traffic is coming to your website, do you have analytics in place that tells you, where your traffic's coming from, who's converting from what sources, that sort of stuff. So these systems and tools need to be tied into, how you go to market. And we call it a marketing system. And then the last part is the marketing integration program, which is what people buy from us. So we've slotted that into the framework as well.
And talk about that piece.
Yeah. So essentially, the way we like to work with our clients is, we'll work with an entrepreneur and we'll say, tell us about where you want to go with the business. And then we'll apply the methodology or our framework into putting together a program that's integrated into the way they work. Too often, entrepreneurs kind of see marketing as an afterthought or something that an admin should do. Whereas it should be integrated into their meetings. It should be discussed all the time in terms of how they're going to market, in terms of what their value proposition is. And it's a mindset thing as well as, a systematization of marketing into the organization. It's difficult to sort of um, um, describe, in 30 seconds or less. But essentially, the way that a business needs to go to market is they need to integrate marketing. So the example we talked about in terms of the events, if you just look at an event in and of itself, but don't integrate it into the sales process, or recognize that there's a constraint. In this case, the constraint was we have a very what I called a big honking carrot, which was this guy who everybody wanted to meet and learn from, and the sales reps were clamoring for his attention. So let's integrate him into the way we want to market the business, but let's do it in a way that he's in front of 30 or 40 or 50 people, at an event, so that you as a sales rep can put more people in front of him, who are in the sales cycle. See what I mean by in terms of integrating? You're integrating all of these things into the way you need to do business.
Yeah, 100%. And we'll give an example because I know you did work with SAP, and then maybe an interesting example there. But when you say constraint, Chris, it makes me think of the book The Goal.
Mhm.
I don't know. Yeah, you're nodding. That's one of my favorite books, The Process of Ongoing Improvement.
Mhm.
And it's literally and I'm pulling it up over here so I can see it, but it's the theory of constraints, right?
Mhm.
So that's you've read that book or seen that one?
I tried to read it. It's extremely, extremely technical, but the
I
reason.
listened to it, so it was easy, it was
Good idea.
easier.
I
It was
should.
easier. Yeah, I don't know if
Yeah,
I could read it, but
yeah,
I love the story there.
yeah, and that's really something that I think entrepreneurs don't think enough about is, what are the constraints that are in place, and how do we address them, but maybe take advantage of them. So in the case of um, SAP, one of the constraints they had with the influencer program that we ran for them was that they couldn't pay influencers, nor should they, to write and talk and advocate their software in such a way that CFOs, who were key decision makers in terms of buying their software, cared about SAP's value proposition. So what we had to do is we had to find influencers that, had the ears and respect of CFOs, and ask them to write about, learn about, maybe advocate about um, what SAP software could do for enterprise customers, and get SAP into the conversation at the CFO table. Um, so we had to figure out a way in which why would an influencer really care about SAP, and what would they need, what would they want in a relationship with SAP. So, and hopefully this is answering your question. We said, okay, so here's one person. She has access to hundreds, if not thousands, of CFOs that respect her, and she writes a lot about the CFO role, generally speaking. Um, she would she would get value out of knowing and talking to a very, very senior executive at SAP. As you go up the chain of command, it becomes harder and harder and harder to have a relationship with very seasoned senior level executives. So we put that in place. We said, yeah, you can talk to the SVP of governance, and compliance, and you can get an exclusive interview with him,
Mm.
for sure. For another one, it was an influencer who had a following of CFOs, and she was an analyst at an independent analyst. So she was out on her own. But again, she didn't have a strong relationship with SAP, and she wanted to establish a stronger relationship with them. The same sort of thing. You can talk to the product manager of this suite of software and get into the nitty gritty, and then you can go back to your CFOs and sort of have them um, have a more intimate discussion with them about what that software does, what it doesn't do, that sort of thing. Yeah, so that was a really important. The other thing we learned in that, not sure necessarily a constraint, but we found one guy who he had 450 followers on Twitter. This was back in the day when it wasn't X. But it
I still
didn't,
call it Twitter, but yeah.
yeah, yeah. So generally the counterintuitive thing would be, well, he doesn't have a lot of followers, how much influence can he have? And what we learned was he had a serious amount of influence because the 450 people were following them were all, CFOs and
It's not about
um,
quantity, it's about quality.
yeah. And then it was about whenever he talked about things, the amount of virality in terms of what he posted was traveled further than something that I would post. And back then I had about 12,000 followers. So that was a very interesting learning experience. In terms of, what we were able to work with. And the other thing was we didn't need a lot of influencers. We didn't need hundreds. We only had 7.
I love it.
Yeah.
Chris, this is what I glean from what you said, and I love that. You identified kind of the ideal client customer decision maker, right, for you as CFOs at the time, and you kind of reverse engineered the people who had really strong followings with those people, in this case CFOs, and then you just looked at what can you do to deliver as much value as possible to that person. In that case, they probably wouldn't be able to get access to a senior executive or whatever it is. And it kind of goes back to what you said before earlier in the conversation about delivering value. And like you did the same thing with the influencers as you did with potential customers or clients too.
Yeah.
So yeah. Going back to SAP for a second, talk about, okay, you have a successful career, director of marketing in a lot of these companies. Talk about getting your first, striking out on your own, because you could have kept that route and been very successful. You were. Your first client you got as your own entity or whatever, for it could be, doesn't be the actual first, but like one of the first milestones, a client that you got after you started.
Yeah. So this is a good thing to chat about. Um, I've always said that the most important asset that any individual has is their network. And that has always been the case for me. So what happened with MI6 is when I left Unis Lumen, I was on good terms with the owners. Um, I had established through success um, a pretty good reputation amongst folks at Cisco, which is a large telecommunications company. Some people may not know because they kind of run the internet. They probably still do.
Yeah, they do. Yeah.
Yeah, so I already sort of left a good impression with the people at Cisco, and Cisco became my first client.
The great first
Because
client.
yeah, yeah.
What were the
So
services you were offering?
what they wanted to do is they wanted to help other integrators, Cisco resellers, how to launch a social media strategy. What this whole social network thing was about, and train them on how to integrate social media into their business from a marketing and support perspective. So if you go back to the framework, those are key new channels that were emerging that many of the system integrators had no idea what to do. And the same with content. Content and blogging was back then was starting to become a thing. So word of mouth and is what started it, and having a success having a good success criteria and strong connections with people helps. So, and from there, focusing on building a strong network going forwards, has always been something that individuals and brands need to think about and implement. And the biggest problem I find right now with companies, and I may be jumping ahead here too much, but is that they really still haven't figured out, how to build a network around their brand, in a community. They think their followers are their community, but they're not. And that's where we're trying to help some of our clients now is, if your top sales rep leaves, is their book of business going with them or they're going to stay with you, which has always been a problem. If your top sales reps leave, are you going to lose those customers? Because that sales rep is pretty much the only reason why the customers stayed with them, because they could probably get the same type of thing elsewhere, but they want the relationship, right?
What did you
Yeah.
decide, Chris, at the time? How did you decide to charge? Because I could see you don't want to charge too little, then Cisco, right?
Mm.
You also don't want to charge too much because like this is your first client. I want to get this business, right?
Mm.
So how do you navigate what to charge?
Well, back then it was kind of like a sales conversation where, I kind of knew how much I needed to earn,
Hmm.
to keep the lights on. I had some funds in the bank that we were using as seed capital, but I didn't really want to use it. I wanted to be customer funded, which is something that any entrepreneur really should think about is how to be customer funded first. Um, but I just picked the number out of the air, but I thought, this is probably worth $5,000, and I need to earn this much, in the next 6 months if I'm going to do it for a 6 month period. What would the follow on be, around $2,500 a month to continue to do them. So, and I always knew that I wanted to charge something by the month as opposed to by the project. So fast forward to today, we sort of positioned our pricing so that you can buy a service from us at, as low as $2,500 a month, and you're going to get a team of people, including a marketing manager and a CMO, that you would never ever be able to get if you hired them. Because it's the quality of the person and their ability and competency to execute. And execution today is a combination of speed and quality, unfortunately. And those two sometimes are a bit of an oxymoron, but speed and quality are very important. So we've sort of priced
There's some
ourselves.
saying, Chris, I don't remember what it is. It's like you can't have all three. It's like, what is it?
Yeah.
Speed, quality, and there's something else.
Yeah.
I don't know what it is. I
I
always
remember
forget
that.
that.
Yeah. Yeah. I remember that. And I
You
don't
can
know
choose
if
two of
that's,
the three, but you can't have all three.
yeah.
But I
Yeah.
can't
Yeah.
remember what the third one is.
I know what you're referring to. Yeah. Yeah.
I'll look it up as you're talking about.
So I always liked the idea of SaaS models, right? Of, how do you charge on a
Yeah.
monthly fee as opposed to project based? And it's easier to sort of predict cash flow that way. So that's how we run the business today.
It's speed, cost, or quality.
Yeah.
You could choose two, not all three.
Yeah. Yeah.
Speed, cost, or quality. Anyways, so
Yeah. I don't, maybe I'm trying to do all three with speed, cost, and quality.
well, that's I guess why you're successful. But it's tough to do,
Very tough to do.
right?
Yeah.
The so that's interesting. From the charging perspective, and then you mentioned team. How did your team evolve throughout the year? So obviously it started out as you.
Mhm.
What did the team look like throughout the years?
So we've deliberately focused in on, um, you know, when we have to expand the team, the concern I've always had is, you know, the cost of employees, right? So it's not that I don't want to have employees at all. It's just, um, I wanted to sort of work with other entrepreneurs as opposed to work, have an employee. So, and we've been doing that for the past 10 years is whenever we need additional support, we will bring in a partner to do various things. So we had a fintech company, for example, and we were charging $10,000 a month, and it was a full outsourced marketing program. So it was content, web, PR, events, all of it. And the goal was we were brought in by venture capitalists, and the goal was we want to prepare this business for exit. And all the people we brought on board were all specialists who own their own companies. So we had an event management company come in, and they didn't have an MI6 agency email address. We didn't hide anything. So that's been our model ever
Yeah,
since.
you bring in a team of experts really for the projects.
Yeah.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, if you look at, I guess I think of it as almost building a house or something like that. I mean, there's someone who's kind of managing everything, making sure it's orchestrated, make sure it all go together. But all those people are typically individual it's not one company typically. I
Yeah.
mean, I'm sure there's
Yeah.
ones out there, but the ones I've seen, they have this expert who's an expert electrician, they bring them in. They have the expert plumber, they bring them in. They're not all under one company. Is
Yeah.
that kind of a fair comparison or?
Yeah. General contractor type of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. And it's worked so far. Will it work in the future? I don't know. I don't know. I think iteration is important. Um, I took on a partner for a while, and it worked for a while, but then it it well, the good news is it allowed me to take a 6-month walkabout, where I was thinking, hey, do I want to continue to do MI6, or there's this other thing that I want to look into, and she was able to run the agency while I was figuring out what I wanted to do next. And it turned out that I wanted to continue on with MI6, and launch Area 81. So
Yeah.
yeah.
There's two things I want to touch on before we finish the interview. One is Area 81, and the other one is KPIs. And it's not what people think of as KPIs, right? Obviously. Let's start. I want to end on Area 81 and what that is and talk about that. But talk about KPIs, right? What that means. I find that kind of intriguing on your site. I'm going to pull it up in a second so people can see it. But yeah, talk about that.
You talking about the key person of influence experiment?
Exactly.
So this is probably one of my, this is an experiment. I love experimenting. And the fact that you talked about person of influence, the book, what was the book that you were mentioning? The influence, key influence.
Oh, Robert Cialdini.
Yeah.
Influence.
Yeah. So
yeah,
this whole notion of influence has always been interesting to me. And we ran the influencer program for SAP, and influencer marketing is seen as the in thing today. How do we get people to create content for us and advocate for us, and maybe pay them, maybe not pay them, that sort of thing. And it's sort of grown into a very large industry. And I stumbled across Daniel Priestley's methodology, which is his key person of influence methodology. And this guy is running multiple businesses. And I thought,
I never heard
well,
of this book until I was looking at your website and I found it. So yeah.
So part of my experiment in this is trying to figure out, whether this is a framework that I can implement myself. So I thought I'd try to implement it myself, and I'm going through the motions until March of 2025, finding out, whether this methodology can work for me. And if it does, or when it does, whether I can implement it for other people through a marketing program. So if you take a look at an entrepreneur that wants to have influence in a specific industry, for example, this Daniel's methodology could be a framework to implement. as an example.
Yeah.
So I thought, okay, well, I'm going to do it a little different. I'm not just going to do a book report or talk about it or blog about it. I'm actually going to implement it and ask people if they want to understand and learn with me, and then sign up and have access to my lessons learned. And again, you'll see that you can't access that one because you have to subscribe. So I'm testing to see whether anybody will subscribe. And my goal is to get 100 subscribers by March 2025, and I have 4 so far.
Well, it's free, so people want
It's
to check it out.
free, but I haven't achieved traction, and I'm not discouraged,
Well, it's
but
been 9 days, so I'm not gonna.
well, no, it's been a
Yeah.
month and a half.
Okay, whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's fine. I mean, I like to experiment and I like to learn. So um I'm going to invite you to participate in it.
Yeah, I'll sign up.
Yeah.
I'll be number 5 or whatever.
Yeah, and the idea behind it is that every week or so, I basically will share what I've done and how it's working, where it isn't working, what my goals are, and people can follow along and learn with me. Um, yeah, so that's what that is. I did it years and years ago, something similar, where I wanted to really learn something and apply it, not just read about it, but actually apply it. Really important to be able to, when you read a book, I mean, a lot of people say, I don't have time to read, which is a weird thing to say, but I understand we're sort of pushed and pulled in so many directions. So I said, well, I want to learn how to apply this, and I'm going to apply it while I'm learning it.
Yeah.
So
No, I love that.
yeah,
Area 81.
yeah, it's my new baby. Um,
And you could see if you're watching the video, you could obviously see it behind.
yeah, that's our
This
Vista.
is, yeah.
And so, first of all, Area 81 stands for a Rural Entrepreneurship Accelerator. And 81 is there's a certain meaning to the numbers 8 and 1, that are geared around being a warrior, working hard, pursuing your dreams, that sort of thing. There is sort of this subtle reference, or maybe not so subtle reference to Area 51, which is, what's in that building, or what are they doing? They're doing unique, innovative things. There's these weird technologies, new technologies, that sort of thing, new things happening. So we're going to play up on that a little bit. But what I've noticed since I moved out of Oakville, which is just outside of Toronto, is, there's a need really to help entrepreneurs um, improve their chances of success. This is actually across Canada. The success rate of entrepreneurship is dismal, and it's really tough to be a successful entrepreneur. Very tough. But there's been progress in understanding, what it takes to be successful, and you start to see that through accelerators like Y Combinator. They seem to have a success formula, and it's a combination of things. It's access to people who have been there, done that. It's a common understanding of the steps you should take in order to start, grow, and scale your business. There are new frameworks coming out in terms of business model canvas maps and other methodologies, but we don't see them enough in terms of them being common. And then the other thing is, just not knowing the right people at the right time and being able to get free advice from people who want to give it, who have been there, done that. These things are all missing. So Area 81 is going to bring everything together for rural entrepreneurs who are kind of faced with some challenges that urban entrepreneurs tend not to experience, just in terms of quantity of contacts, number of access to customer markets, not really knowing how to expand into other markets, that sort of thing. So, and what's interesting is we're applying the lean canvas and lean stack methodologies from Ash Maurya, who wrote the book Running Lean. and we're running Area 81 through it as if it's a startup itself. So we're learning as we go. So this experimentation thing that I'm doing with the KPI experiment, I'm also doing with Area 81, and trying to figure out, what's, how do we get to um, the business model growth stage within 36 months, applying their methodology and utilizing all the tools that they offer. So I've become a level 1 coach, and I'm going to level 2 and level 3 certification right now. And it's interesting because he brings up this concept of constraints, right? And an entrepreneur needs to identify, what are the constraints that are making my business not successful, and how do I limit those constraints? And that's just one example, but Area 81 is really designed to, if somebody wanted to say, well, how would you compare it to something else? It's the Canadian version of a Y Combinator for rural entrepreneurs.
Is this for Canada and US or just Canada?
Just for Canada right now, and just for Grey Bruce, which is the region that I'm in. But eventually we'll want to go to other rural markets in Canada once we've got traction for Grey Bruce.
Chris, this has been hugely valuable. I really appreciate you sharing your your expertise, your knowledge, your years of experience with us. I want to encourage people to you can check out the website, mi6, the number 6 agency.com to learn more. And you can check out more episodes of the podcast, and also point out where people can find your podcast.
Yeah, so it's on the website. It's
Yep.
called the Rural Entrepreneur podcast series. And
Yeah, so that everyone can go to mi6agency.com and navigate to the podcast from there.
yeah, if they just do a search for
Yep.
rural entrepreneur, it will pop up.
Any favorite episodes or guests on that
Oh,
one?
geez. There's 18 of them so far. Um, yeah, I would say there's too many. I'd rather not pick
Well, I
one
want to
over
point
the other.
someone to one of them. Just they could start somewhere, right?
Okay. One of them is about ginger. Yeah, Ginger Bugs Rise, a tale of resilience, community, and innovation and entrepreneurship. A very interesting story about a rural entrepreneur that has built uh, a consumer packaging company, a beverage. Basically, it's a sort of a more nutritional source of drink, and she's building a company around it. She was on Dragon's Den, which is
Oh, cool.
Canadian's version of Shark Tank.
Yeah,
Really
I've watched
interesting,
it.
yeah, interesting woman.
What kind of drinks are they? Are they like I don't know why I'm picturing kombucha for some reason, but I don't know if
Yeah,
that's what it is.
yeah, yeah. So that's within the same category. It's
Yeah.
ginger. It's made from ginger root. Um, and it's a drink that is designed to be more healthy for you. It's carbonated. They're in Whole Foods, and the story behind how they got into Whole Foods, was about her meeting somebody at a event in Meaford, which is a small town, and that whole colliding with somebody, meeting somebody who was a buyer at Whole Foods in small town Ontario is such a cool story. Um, so now she's trying to raise capital, and we really want her to continue to, we'd like for her to make all of it here. Right now she has to source ginger from another country. So we're talking to farmers in the area to see if they'll grow ginger. So again, this idea of kind of figuring out ways to network people together and exchange value, create value, within a network. That's kind of what I like about what Area 81 could be is, who within this network of people can build something bigger for everybody, and then sell it to the world.
Love it. Chris, I want to be the first one to thank you. Check out Mi6 Agency, more episodes of the podcast, and we will see everyone next time. Thanks, Chris.
Thanks. All the best. Appreciate it.
What I got, you can't buy. It resides between my eyes. Walked through the fire, came out better on the other side. See, life's like a beach if you find the sand. And right now, I'm feeling like 100 grand.